When 17-year-old Emma first stepped into the old house her family had just moved into, she never imagined what she would uncover. It was meant to be a fresh start, a new chapter, but everything changed the moment she found a hidden room behind the attic wall. Inside, she discovered something that would alter her life forever. Little did she know, this seemingly innocent find would unravel secrets buried deep in the house's past, secrets that no one, not even her parents, were prepared for. Emma had always imagined living in a house with character, somewhere old, full of stories and history, not the new, modern homes her friends boasted about. When her family found the old house on the edge of town, it felt like the perfect fit. Nestled in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by woods, the house was large, its aged brickwork covered in ivy, and its wooden floors creaked as if the walls themselves held secrets. Emma was drawn to it immediately. The possibilities of discovery seemed endless. The thought of moving away from the bustling city life was daunting, but it was a fresh start, a chance for Emma to explore a new chapter of her life. Her parents were excited about the move. Her mother, a history enthusiast, couldn't wait to restore the old house to its former glory. The idea of uncovering the house's history, layer by layer, was thrilling to her. Her father, a successful architect, was already imagining the renovations, the possibilities of updating the space while keeping its charm intact. But for Emma, the excitement wasn't in the renovations, it was in the mystery of what the house might hold. There was something about the creaky stairs, the dark corners of the attic, and the old basement that seemed to whisper secrets. She couldn't help but feel that the house was waiting for her to uncover something long forgotten. At first, the move was overwhelming. Boxes piled high in the rooms, unfamiliar sounds at night, and the eerie quiet of the countryside contrasted sharply with the lively city they had left behind. Emma's younger brother, Max, immediately started making up stories about ghosts living in the house. He'd heard the town had rumors of strange happenings, but Emma wasn't so sure. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this place. While her parents focused on the practical tasks of moving in and unpacking, Emma took every opportunity to explore the house on her own. She wandered through the old rooms, running her fingers over the dusty walls, curious about the history they held. In the attic, she found old furniture covered in white sheets, a chest filled with forgotten belongings, and piles of old books. She was fascinated by the house's age, its layers of history, but Emma had no idea how soon her curiosity would lead her to an unexpected discovery that would change everything. It was on a quiet Saturday afternoon when Emma's exploration took a strange turn. Her parents were busy unpacking the boxes in the living room, and Max had disappeared outside to explore the backyard. Emma, however, couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't yet seen all that the house had to offer. There had to be more hidden in its old bones. Her wanderings eventually led her back up to the attic, a place she had only briefly explored the first day they moved in. It was filled with old furniture, unwanted pieces from the previous owners, a couple of dusty bookshelves, and a stack of forgotten belongings. But this time, something caught her eye. The sun streamed through a small window, casting long shadows across the room. As Emma stepped further in, she noticed something odd about the far wall. Behind an old wardrobe, there was a section of the wall that didn't look quite right. The wallpaper was slightly askew, and the wood paneling looked more worn here than in the rest of the room. Emma approached it, a mix of curiosity and excitement building in her chest. She ran her fingers over the wallpaper, pushing gently on the uneven surface. To her surprise, it gave way. The wall, or at least a section of it, shifted slightly, revealing a hidden door. Her breath caught in her throat. She had read stories about hidden rooms in old houses, but this was real. The door was narrow, almost as if it had been designed to be overlooked. It was made of wood, the same as the walls, with no handle, just a faint line around the edges where it could open. Her heart pounded in her chest as she gingerly pushed against it. It creaked open with an unexpected ease, revealing a dark, narrow passage. Emma hesitated. She could feel her pulse quicken, the air in the attic suddenly heavier, filled with a strange energy. This wasn't just any room, it felt secretive, like it had been hidden for a reason. Still, her curiosity drove her forward. She couldn't let it go. Whatever was behind that door, it called to her. The passage led to a small, hidden room, barely big enough to hold a few pieces of old furniture and some forgotten relics. The room smelled of dust and something else, something faintly metallic. The air seemed stagnant, untouched by time. Emma's eyes darted around, trying to make sense of the space. The walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, and a few shelves stood along the edges, stacked with old books and odd trinkets. But what really caught her attention was a small desk in the corner. Its wood chipped and worn, as if it had been used for something important. Emma stepped into the room, her feet moving cautiously, as if not to disturb the thick silence that hung in the air. She approached the desk, drawn to a small drawer that was slightly open, as if inviting her to look inside. She hesitated for a moment before pulling it open completely, her fingers trembling. Inside, there was a small stack of old papers, yellowed with age. The top page was a letter, written in neat, cursive handwriting. Emma could barely make out the words, but one name stood out, Eliza Lark. The letter was dated decades ago. Emma's eyes skimmed over the words, her breath catching in her throat as she read through the eerie message. The letter spoke of a family secret, something that had been hidden away for years, a dark mystery tied to the house itself. The letter mentioned Eliza Lark, a name Emma had never heard before, but one that seemed strangely familiar. She couldn't quite place why it felt significant, but the name stirred something deep inside her. Just as Emma was about to continue reading, a sudden noise from the hallway startled her. She quickly shoved the letter back into the drawer, her heart pounding. Had someone heard her? She stood still for a moment, holding her breath, waiting for the sound to pass. But the noise never came again. Only the stillness remained. Emma felt a cold chill wash over her as she glanced around the room. Her fingers brushed against an old, dust-covered mirror hanging on the wall, and she caught a glimpse of her own reflection. But in the mirror, something was different. There was a flicker of movement behind her, a shadow that didn't belong. She whipped around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room, filled with the remnants of time. The air seemed to grow heavier, as if the room itself were watching her, waiting for her to uncover more of its secrets. Emma felt the unmistakable weight of history pressing down on her. This was no ordinary room. Whatever had happened here, whatever had been hidden here, was still very much alive in the walls. The feeling of unease settled deep within her chest, but her curiosity pushed her to keep going. She decided to explore the shelves next. Each shelf was lined with old books. Some looked as if they hadn't been touched in years. Others were piled haphazardly. Emma reached for a thick leather-bound book in the back corner. As she pulled it from the shelf, a hidden compartment in the wall behind the shelf slowly opened, revealing a locked box. Emma's breath caught again. The box was small, ornate, with intricate designs carved into the wood. It was locked, but there was something about it that made her feel certain it held the answers she was searching for. Emma's fingers hovered over the box, heart racing as she tried to figure out what to do next. She couldn't leave it unopened, not now. Not when she was so close to uncovering whatever was hidden in this room. The house had secrets, and she had a feeling that unlocking this box would reveal something that would change her life forever. Emma's hands trembled as she placed the ornate locked box back down on the desk. Her heart pounded in her chest as she surveyed the room again. The walls seemed to close in around her, and the silence felt almost suffocating. The dim light from the attic barely reached into the corners of the room, casting eerie shadows that seemed to shift with every movement. Emma's eyes kept darting back to the box, its intricate carvings now seeming to pulse with a strange energy. Whatever was inside, it felt important, almost as if it had been waiting for her to find it. But there was no key, no way to open the box, and that was driving her insane. She ran her fingers along the box's edges, as though hoping to find some hidden latch or mechanism. But there was nothing. The lock remained stubbornly shut, keeping whatever secrets it held safely inside. Frustrated, Emma turned her attention back to the room. She had already seen the photographs of the old woman, Eliza Lark, and read the cryptic letter detailing the family's dark past. But there had to be more. There had to be a reason this room had been sealed away, hidden from the world for so long. What had Eliza Lark been hiding? It was then that Emma noticed something strange, a faint glow coming from the far side of the room. She turned her head, squinting through the gloom. There, tucked beneath a pile of old books, was a small, weathered chest. It looked just as old as the rest of the objects in the room, but there was something different about it. A sense of urgency. Without thinking, Emma walked toward it, drawn to it as if some invisible force was pulling her forward. As she knelt beside the chest, she hesitated. What if it was just another dead end? What if it was empty, like so many of the other drawers and boxes she'd already opened? But the chest felt significant, its surface engraved with strange symbols, much like the box. These markings were different, though more intricate, more deliberate. They seemed to speak to her, urging her to open it. With a deep breath, Emma unclipped the small lock on the chest. The sound of the metal clasp clicking open seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. She lifted the lid slowly, as if expecting something to jump out at her. But instead of a surprise, the chest revealed only a collection of old papers, each one faded with age. Emma sifted through the papers, her hands shaking slightly. Most of the pages were written in a language she didn't recognize, with symbols she had never seen before. But as she dug deeper, she found something that made her heart race. A single photograph of Eliza Lark, standing in front of the house, much older than the one in the previous picture. This time, however, her expression was different. There was a sense of dread in her eyes, a look of desperation that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. On the back of the photograph was a message written in faded ink. Emma's hands trembled as she read the words aloud, though they barely made sense. Do not open the door. It is too late for us. The house calls, and it will claim what it wants. The words sent a jolt of fear through Emma's body. She had already opened the door to the hidden room. Had she disturbed something she shouldn't have? Was this what Eliza had been trying to warn her about? The house had been waiting for her. It had been waiting for someone to unlock its secrets. And now, Emma had no idea how to stop whatever had been set into motion. As she stared at the photograph, she realized that the woman in the picture was standing in front of the very same hidden door Emma had discovered, the door that she had already opened. She felt sick to her stomach. Eliza had been trying to keep the house's secrets buried. But now, the door had been opened, and whatever had been hidden for so long was no longer contained. The room suddenly felt colder. The air thickened, and Emma could hear a faint creaking sound. It was the house, its walls groaning, as if it were alive, reacting to the disturbance she had caused. Emma stood up quickly, her breath shallow as she backed away from the chest. She had to get out of there. She had to find her parents. They needed to know what she had found, and they needed to leave before it was too late. But as she turned to exit the room, something caught her eye. A small wooden box, tucked away in the far corner of the room, partially hidden by the shadows. Emma's gut twisted. She didn't want to open it. She didn't want to see what was inside. But she had already come this far. With a shaking hand, Emma reached for the box, her fingers curling around its edges. It was heavier than it looked, and as she lifted it, a strange humming noise began to fill the room. The sound was low at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder with every second, until it seemed to reverberate through her entire body. Her heart raced, and her palms began to sweat as she placed the box down on the desk. Before she could open it, the humming stopped abruptly. The room fell eerily silent, and for a moment, Emma thought she heard footsteps in the hallway. She froze, holding her breath. She wasn't alone in the house. Someone or something was in there with her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as the temperature in the room seemed to drop further. She had to make a choice: open the box and uncover the final secret of the house, or leave it closed and run as fast as she could to her family. But she couldn't just leave. The pull to uncover the truth was too strong. Emma slowly lifted the lid of the box, bracing herself for what she might find. The room seemed to hold its breath as she peered inside. As Emma slowly lifted the lid of the wooden box, her heart pounded in her chest. The room seemed to hum with energy, a strange, unsettling vibration that made her skin crawl. She glanced down inside, her eyes widening as she saw what lay before her. The box contained an assortment of old, yellowed papers, a set of brittle keys, and strangest of all, a small, ornate pendant. The pendant was shaped like a crescent moon, intricately designed with markings that looked almost like runes. The metal was cool to the touch, as though it had been waiting for someone to find it. But it was the papers that caught Emma's attention first. The top one was written in the same handwriting as the journal she had found earlier, Eliza Lark's. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the letter, the words scrawled in hurried ink. Keep the door locked. Do not open it again. If the house calls to you, you must resist. It will not let you go. The curse will consume you. It is too late for me, but not for you. Emma's breath hitched as she read the words again, the weight of their meaning pressing down on her. The house? The curse? What had Eliza been trying to keep hidden for all these years? The words seemed to echo in the stillness of the room, each one carrying an ominous warning. She could feel the weight of her own curiosity pulling her deeper into the mystery, but part of her now wished she had never opened the door to the hidden room in the first place. The pendant in the box caught her eye again. It seemed to radiate an almost magnetic energy. She picked it up, turning it over in her fingers. The markings etched into the metal seemed almost familiar, as though they held some deeper meaning. She had seen symbols like this before, though not in any books or records she had read. It was as though the pendant was speaking to her, urging her to understand its significance. Emma glanced around the room. The hum that had filled the air earlier had ceased, and the silence now felt even more oppressive. It was as though the room was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. A shiver ran down her spine. There was no denying it now. The house was alive with its own kind of energy, an energy that had been waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. With a sense of dread, Emma turned her attention to the other papers in the box. They appeared to be notes, some scribbled hastily, others more composed. As she read through them, she realized they told the story of Eliza Lark's life in the house, the terrible events that had unfolded, and the dark ritual that had sealed the hidden room away. Eliza had been part of a secret society, an occult group that had used the house for their rituals. Emma felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as she read further. Eliza had discovered the house's dark past, and in doing so, had uncovered a curse that bound the house to an unknown force. Eliza's notes revealed that the house had once belonged to a family who had practiced dark magic. The original owners had believed that they could control the force within the house, whatever it was, by performing a ritual that bound it to the very walls. But the ritual went wrong. The house itself had become a prison, holding whatever dark force had been unleashed. The room Emma had discovered was built to contain this force, its power sealed within the walls. The most chilling part of Eliza's notes came at the very end, written in large, frantic letters. Do not trust the pendant. It holds the key to the house's power, but it also holds its curse. If you wear it, you will become a part of the house. It will never let you leave. Emma froze, the pendant still clutched tightly in her hand. What did this mean? Was the pendant the key to unlocking the house's dark force? And had she already triggered something by finding the hidden room? The room suddenly felt colder, the air heavy with a presence she could not explain. Emma's instincts screamed at her to leave, to stop digging into the house's past, and to never return to the room again. But it was too late for that. She had already opened the door. She had already disturbed the force that had been trapped for so long. The questions in her mind multiplied, and the fear that gripped her intensified. What had she unleashed? Just as she was about to close the box, a faint creak from the hallway caught her attention. She stood still, holding her breath. The creak came again, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Someone or something was walking through the house. Emma's heart pounded, and she felt an overwhelming urge to run. But where could she go? The house was huge, and she had no idea what was waiting for her outside the hidden room. The strange sensation of being watched swept over her, making her feel as though the walls themselves were closing in. The footsteps grew louder, and Emma instinctively backed away from the desk, the pendant still in her hand. It was as if the house itself was calling to her, pulling her deeper into its web. She needed to find her parents. She needed to leave this room and tell them everything before it was too late. Emma stood frozen, listening as the footsteps grew closer. The tension in the air thickened, and she could feel her pulse racing. She needed answers. But what if the truth was more dangerous than she could imagine? The pendant, the curse, the house, the hidden room, all of it was connected in ways she couldn't yet understand, and whatever she had uncovered, it was clear that the house was not finished with her yet. As Emma held the pendant in her trembling hand, the footsteps in the hallway grew louder. Her heart raced, a surge of panic sweeping over her. The house, once so quiet and still, now seemed alive with something otherworldly. The footsteps weren't normal. There was something unnerving about them. They were too deliberate, too slow, almost as though they were making sure Emma could hear them, drawing her in, enticing her to look closer. For a moment, Emma hesitated, standing perfectly still in the center of the room, trying to make sense of what was happening. The air had grown inexplicably colder. Her breath was visible now, forming small clouds in the dim light. The old house creaked and groaned as if it was waking up from a long slumber, its bones shifting under the weight of whatever had been set into motion. The footsteps continued, and Emma couldn't ignore the feeling that she wasn't alone. She turned toward the door, every instinct screaming at her to leave the room. But something inside her, something dark and curious, held her in place. What was it that she had uncovered? And why did it feel like the house was now waiting for her? Suddenly, a whisper echoed through the room, barely audible, as if it was carried by the wind. Emma spun around, her heart racing in her chest. The whisper was faint but unmistakable. It seemed to call her name, Emma, but the voice sounded like no one she knew. It was cold, hollow, as though it came from far beneath the earth. Emma, it whispered again, sending chills up her spine. For a moment, she froze. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for the source of the voice, but there was nothing. The only movement in the room came from the shadows, which seemed to flicker and sway despite the stillness of the air. The voice came from all around her, distant but close enough to make her feel as if it were inside her head. "Emma, come closer." The voice continued, soft and beckoning. "It is waiting for you. You cannot leave." The words echoed through the room, louder this time, as if the house itself was speaking. The pendant in Emma's hand grew cold, colder than before, and she felt a tightening in her chest, a pressure, as if the very walls were closing in on her. Her fingers instinctively clenched around the pendant, and at that moment, she felt a rush of energy course through her. It was powerful, overwhelming, and it made her knees buckle slightly. She could no longer deny it. The house was alive. The footsteps grew louder, now accompanied by a low, unsettling growl that vibrated in her bones. It wasn't human, that much was clear. It sounded deep, guttural, as if something from the dark recesses of the house had awakened, something that had been locked away for far too long. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She needed to get out. She needed to leave the room. But before she could make a move, the door to the hidden room slammed shut with a deafening bang, the force of the impact knocking a few old books from the shelves. Emma spun around in fear, her pulse racing as she tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. From the inside. She panicked, her hands fumbling at the handle as she shoved against the door, but it remained stubbornly shut. The growling had stopped, replaced by a different sound, the unmistakable sound of something scratching against the walls. It was low, rhythmic, and unnervingly close, as though something was trying to break through. Emma's mind raced as she backed away from the door, glancing around the room. The air felt thick with malice, like something was watching her from every corner. The room itself seemed to pulse with an energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, the thudding sound growing louder as she searched for an escape. The scratching continued, louder now, as if it were moving along the walls toward her. Her eyes landed on the small desk in the corner, where she had found the letter earlier. The drawer was still open, the papers inside lying untouched. In a desperate attempt to find something that could help her, she rushed toward it, pulling the drawer open further. The pages inside rustled as she rifled through them, looking for something, anything, that could explain what was happening. She stopped when her fingers brushed against a small, leather-bound book tucked under the stack of papers. It wasn't like the others. It felt heavier, as if it held more than just words. Emma opened it carefully, scanning the first few pages. The handwriting inside was frantic, as if the person who had written it had been in a hurry to get the words down before time ran out. The book was full of descriptions, rituals, symbols, warnings. One page in particular caught her eye, its edges worn and torn. The writing on it was different from the rest, written in larger letters. "Do not enter the house at night. The curse will awaken and claim the one who disturbs the door. The house will feed on their soul." Emma's eyes widened as she read the words. This was it. This was what had been hidden all along. The curse wasn't just about the hidden room. It was about the house itself. The house, with its dark energy and restless spirits, had been waiting for someone to open the door. It had been waiting for Emma. Suddenly, the room grew even colder, and the scratching noise stopped. Emma's blood ran cold as she heard a voice, low, guttural, almost growling, coming from the darkness behind her. "You shouldn't have come here, Emma." Emma turned quickly, her heart hammering in her chest. But there was nothing there. The shadows in the room seemed to move, but there was no one visible. Yet the voice was unmistakable. It was in her ears, echoing around her. It was in the house. Fear surged through Emma as she realized that the house was not just alive, it was awake, and it had marked her as its next victim. Her mind raced as she frantically tried to figure out how to escape. But the house was not going to let her leave that easily. Emma could no longer ignore the heavy presence in the room. The walls felt as though they were closing in on her, and the shadows seemed to move in response to her every breath. The house was alive in ways she never could have imagined, and it had been waiting for someone to disturb its slumber. She had thought that discovering the hidden room would be an adventure, something to satisfy her curiosity about the house's long-forgotten past. But now, it had become a nightmare, one that threatened to swallow her whole. The voice, low and growling, still echoed in her ears. It seemed to come from everywhere, yet from nowhere at the same time. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered again, its tone mocking, as though it already knew her fate. Emma's knees felt weak, her heart pounding so loudly that she could hear nothing else. The pendant still hung in her hand, its cold surface almost burning against her skin, as if urging her to understand the truth. She had to leave. She had to escape. But the door wouldn't open. It was as if the house itself was holding her inside, trapping her in the room that had been sealed for so many years. Emma's mind raced, and she turned her attention back to the journal she had found earlier. The words she had read flashed in her mind, but they were jumbled, blurred by the terror that was slowly overtaking her. The house had a curse, she remembered. It had been sealed off for a reason. And Eliza Lark, the woman in the photographs, had known what would happen. She had been the one to try and stop it. Emma grabbed the journal again, scanning through the pages, her fingers flying over the old, brittle paper. She found the passage she had missed earlier, one that made her freeze in place. Eliza had written, "The curse is not of the house, but of the blood that runs through it. It is in our veins, passed down through generations. It calls to us, pulls us in, until we are its slaves. The only way to break it is to destroy the house, to sever the ties once and for all." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She read the words again, the truth sinking in like a stone. The curse wasn't just about the house. It was tied to her family, her bloodline. She was the one the house had been waiting for, the one who had unlocked the door to the darkness that had been sealed away for so long. It was her connection to the house that had awakened its power. And now, the house wanted her, just as it had wanted Eliza. But what did it want? What would happen to her if she didn't stop it? She glanced down at the pendant again. It was glowing faintly now, its markings seeming to shift and change in the dim light. It was no longer just an object. It was a key, a vessel of power that tied her to the house in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. And it was clear that whatever had happened to Eliza, whatever had driven her to leave these cryptic warnings, was about to happen to Emma as well. A sudden noise broke through Emma's thoughts. The door to the hidden room creaked open on its own, though she hadn't touched it. Emma's heart skipped a beat, and she whirled around, half expecting to see something, or someone, standing there. But there was no one. Only darkness. The air felt colder now, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch toward her. The house was waiting. Emma didn't hesitate this time. She rushed toward the door, her pulse racing, but the door slammed shut just as her hand touched the knob. The force of it rattled the walls, and she stumbled backward, gasping for air. Her mind spun in a blur, and a sickening realization settled in her stomach. The house wasn't going to let her leave. It was alive, and it had been waiting for her. A voice whispered in her ear, the same voice she had heard earlier. "You belong to this place now, Emma. You always have. There is no escaping it." Emma's breath quickened as she tried to back away, but the shadows in the room moved toward her, closing in from all sides. She was trapped. Just as the darkness seemed to swallow her whole, a light flickered in the distance, small at first, but growing larger with every passing second. It wasn't natural, this light. It had the wrong color, the wrong intensity. It pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and rhythmic, pulling her toward it. She stumbled forward, unable to resist the pull, until she found herself standing in front of the small desk. The journal was still open in front of her, its pages filled with desperate warnings. And there, on the last page, were the final words of Eliza Lark. "The key is the blood. The only way to destroy the curse is to let it consume you, to give yourself to the house. Only then will it be free." Emma's body went numb. She couldn't understand it. She didn't want to understand it. But she knew one thing: the house was demanding something from her. It wanted her blood. A horrific realization washed over her. Eliza had done it. She had tried to break the curse by sacrificing herself to the house, to let it consume her so that it could be free. But it hadn't worked. The house had kept its hold. Emma's hands trembled as she reached for the pendant. Could she do the same? Could she give herself to the house to break the curse, to end the nightmare? The door to the room creaked open again, the light now blinding as it flooded the room. Emma stepped forward, drawn toward the glowing doorway, but as she crossed the threshold, she heard the voice again, louder now, more insistent. "You cannot escape. You are mine." The air in the room grew thick, almost suffocating, as Emma stepped through the door, the blinding light illuminating her path. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to turn around, to leave the house and never look back. But it was too late for that. The curse had already been unleashed, and now there was no escaping it. The house was demanding its toll, and Emma was the one who had opened the door. The moment she had disturbed the hidden room, she had set everything in motion. The light flickered, and the door slammed shut behind her, sealing her inside the room. A sharp, spine-chilling sound echoed through the air, like the creaking of an ancient door being pulled open against its will. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the ground beneath her feet felt unstable, like the house itself was shifting, alive with an insatiable hunger. Emma could feel the house's power pressing down on her, wrapping itself around her like an inescapable chain. She tried to move, to run, but her feet felt as if they were glued to the floor. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears as the shadows grew longer, darker. The room felt claustrophobic, as though the very walls were closing in on her. She glanced around in panic, her eyes landing on the pendant still clutched tightly in her hand. It was glowing now, brighter than before, its dark energy swirling in the air like a tangible force. "You cannot escape." The voice boomed, louder this time, reverberating through the room. It was no longer just a whisper, it was a command. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, as if the house itself was speaking to her, its voice twisting and warping with every word. "You are mine." Emma could feel it now, the truth settling over her like a heavy cloak. The house was not just a structure, it was a living entity, a being that fed on the souls of those who entered its walls. It had been waiting for someone to unlock its secrets, and now that she had done so, she was bound to it. There was no escape, no way to undo the damage she had done. But the house was not satisfied yet. It demanded more. She backed away slowly, her pulse racing, but no matter how far she moved, the shadows seemed to stretch toward her, pulling her in. The house was tightening its grip on her, and she could feel her strength slipping away. Her thoughts were clouded, her mind scrambling to find a way out. But the pull of the darkness was overwhelming. "You will become one with the house," the voice continued, its tone filled with malevolent satisfaction. "You are the key to its power. You will never leave." The pendant in her hand grew even colder, and Emma could feel its power surging through her. It was as if the very air around her was charged with energy, the walls vibrating with a dark hum that echoed in her bones. The curse was already working its way into her soul, and she could feel it. The house was taking hold. But then, just as the darkness seemed to swallow her whole, a thought broke through the fog of fear and confusion in her mind. The journal. The words Eliza had written echoed in her mind once more. "The key is the blood. The only way to destroy the curse is to let it consume you, to give yourself to the house." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had read those words earlier, but now they made sense in a way they hadn't before. Eliza hadn't been speaking metaphorically. She had known the only way to break the curse, to stop the house from consuming her, was to give herself up to it. The curse needed her blood. She had to let the house take her, to sacrifice herself in order to destroy its power. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't about defeating the house. It was about sealing it away for good, about sacrificing herself to break the cycle and end the curse once and for all. Emma clenched her teeth as the weight of the decision pressed down on her. This was it. There was no turning back. She took a step forward, her gaze fixed on the glowing pendant in her hand. She had no idea what would happen once she gave in, but she knew she had no choice. The house had taken so much already, it had taken Eliza, and it would take her, too, if she didn't do something. Emma reached up and placed the pendant around her neck, feeling its cold weight settle against her skin. The room seemed to respond, the shadows creeping closer, wrapping around her like tendrils. The growling, the whispers, the voice, all of it grew louder, more insistent. It was as though the house was pulling her into its very core. But Emma didn't resist. She couldn't. The house screamed in triumph, its energy surging, and Emma felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. Her body tingled, as if the very walls of the house were seeping into her, filling the emptiness inside her with power. For a moment, she felt like she was no longer alone. She was connected to the house, part of its twisted essence, and as the darkness closed in, she allowed herself to be consumed. In that final moment, Emma whispered to herself, "I am the last key." The house seemed to quiet as the last remnants of Emma's sacrifice settled into its walls. The shadows that had once seemed so eager to consume her now hung in stillness, no longer pressing, no longer pulling. Emma felt a calmness wash over her, as though the energy that had driven the house's hunger had been quelled. The darkness, once so overwhelming, now felt distant and weak. She stood in the center of the room, her fingers still clasped around the pendant that hung around her neck. It felt like a part of her now, as though it had always been there. But something had shifted within her, she could feel it. The house, which had once pulsed with malevolent life, now seemed still, at peace, as if it had finally been freed from the curse that had bound it for so long. Emma's heart, still racing, slowed to a gentle rhythm. The weight of what had just happened settled in. The house, the pendant, the curse, it was all over. The darkness that had haunted her family for generations had been destroyed, and with it, the house's hold on her bloodline. She had broken the cycle. She had freed herself. But as the house settled into a strange, eerie calm, Emma couldn't help but feel the emptiness of it all. She had given herself to the house, but the journey had come at a price. The cost of breaking the curse had been her own sacrifice, her own future. Her parents, Max, and the life she had once known, those things were now beyond her reach. And yet, as she looked around, Emma could feel something else, a presence, faint but familiar. It was the ghost of Eliza Lark, the woman whose fate had been tied to the house so many years ago. Emma could feel her, benevolent, at peace, no longer a prisoner of the curse. Eliza's presence was now a soft, reassuring comfort, as though she had been waiting for Emma to set things right, to close the door for good. "Thank you, Emma." The voice was faint, a whisper in the air, but it carried the weight of gratitude. "You have freed us all." Emma nodded, even though she knew Eliza couldn't see her. Her hands, still trembling slightly, reached up to touch the pendant. She had done it. She had ended the curse. The house was no longer a prison. It was just a house now, an ordinary place where stories would fade into memory. And Emma, though she would never return to the life she had once known, had given the house the peace it had craved for so long. With one final glance around the room, Emma walked toward the door. As her hand brushed the handle, she felt a gentle warmth pass through her. The house, in its strange, silent way, was showing her the way out. The shadows, once so threatening, no longer followed her. The light from the hallway streamed into the room, filling it with the warmth of freedom. As she stepped out into the hallway, Emma paused. For the first time since discovering the hidden room, she no longer felt like she was being watched. The house was no longer alive, its hunger sated. It had been an incredible, terrifying journey, but she had done what was needed. She had saved her family, and in doing so, had liberated herself from the curse. The last remnants of the darkness faded as Emma walked down the stairs. She didn't look back at the house. She didn't need to. The past had been buried, the door to its secrets closed forever. What was left now was the future she had reclaimed, not just for herself, but for those she loved. Emma's journey through the hidden room, the curse, and the ultimate sacrifice shows the power of courage, sacrifice, and self-discovery. Have you ever felt like you were bound to a place or a history that you couldn't escape? Share your thoughts and stories with us below. Have you ever uncovered a family secret or faced a challenge so intense that you felt it would change everything? We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed Emma's story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of mystery, adventure, and the strength to face what lies hidden in the shadows.